In the endless skies over Europe, survival was measured in seconds. Every mission meant hundreds of lives depending on a few men behind heavy guns. They were the aerial gunners, the defenders of the bomber formations. What they discovered in the heat of combat changed the science of air warfare forever. Victory didn't come from aiming at the enemy, but from understanding motion, prediction, and timing. This is how U.S. gunners stopped aiming directly and dominated the skies of World War II. When the United States entered the war in 1941, its air crews were courageous but inexperienced. Early missions over North Africa and Europe revealed a devastating truth. The Luftwaffe's veteran pilots could tear through bomber formations with deadly precision. At first, U.S. gunners did what instinct told them to. They pointed their guns straight at the oncoming aircraft and fired. But mission after mission ended in heavy losses. Investigators studying gun camera footage realized the problem wasn't courage, it was geometry. The enemy was moving too fast. Bullets simply couldn't reach where the fighter used to be. This discovery led to a fundamental shift. Gunners had to learn to anticipate motion, to shoot not where they saw the target, but where it would be when the bullets arrived. The shift from instinctive shooting to calculated deflection marked a turning point. This new way of thinking required discipline, patience, and mathematics. In gunnery schools across the United States, Las Vegas, Laredo, Harlingen, recruits learned trigonometry and vector motion. They practiced judging distance and angle in fractions of a second. Instructors drilled them, remember gentlemen, if you can see his propeller, you're already too late. Anticipate, lead, time your fire. It was during these lessons that the phrase aim behind gained meaning. Depending on the angle of attack, the fastest way to a hit was to position your fire behind the visible aircraft's nose, compensating for bullet travel time and relative closure rate. The paradox made perfect sense in practice and soon became the difference between life and death. The U.S. Army Air Forces invested millions into an unprecedented training system. From sand dunes to desert airfields, young men learned to shoot at moving targets under every imaginable condition. They used camera guns that recorded their aim, allowing instructors to critique their timing frame by frame. Mechanical trainers like the Waller Gunnery Trainer and the Flexigun Simulator turned movie theaters into classrooms of aerial warfare. By late 1943, the United States was producing more skilled aerial gunners than any other nation in history. Graduates were no longer just soldiers, they were physicists of survival, predicting trajectories and angles faster than thought. The U.S. didn't stop at training, it engineered the tools to make precision possible. The computing gun sight, particularly the K3, K4, and K14 models, revolutionized air combat. Using gyroscopes and mirrors, the sight automatically adjusted for bullet drop, target motion, and lead. Now, when a gunner tracked an enemy, the sight did the math. The reticle showed not the current position of the fighter, but the predicted point of impact. This technology effectively allowed the gunner to aim behind without overthinking. It merged human intuition with mechanical precision, one of the first steps toward the age of computerized targeting. In the tight, freezing compartments of a B-17 or B-24, no gunner worked alone. Each position, nose, top, waist, ball, and tail, formed a defensive network. When enemy fighters attacked, the crew moved as one organism. The tail gunner would call out, "Bandits, 6 o'clock high," and the entire formation shifted to cover each other's blind spots. The tactic of aiming behind only worked when every gunner coordinated his fire. Instead of panicked bursts, formations unleashed overlapping arcs of timed deflection fire, creating invisible barriers that no fighter wanted to cross. The Luftwaffe was quick to notice. German aces developed new tactics, head-on attacks, steep dives, and roller coaster approaches to exploit blind spots. Yet each new maneuver forced U.S. gunners to refine their skills further. By 1944, many American crews had logged dozens of missions. Experience had hardened instinct into reflex. When German Me-109s or FW-190s appeared, the gunners no longer fired in panic. They waited, tracked, led, and fired controlled bursts at calculated deflection angles. Veteran Luftwaffe pilots began describing U.S. formations as walls of death. Each attack brought higher risk, and the price of engaging became too high. But victory came with a terrible price. Tens of thousands of American airmen never returned. In 1943 alone, bomber losses over Europe exceeded 4,000 aircraft. Each gunner knew the odds. At 25,000 feet, the temperature dropped below 40 Celsius, oxygen masks froze, and the noise was deafening. Frostbite and exhaustion were constant. Yet amid the chaos, gunners kept calculating, adjusting, aiming, often while their aircraft burned around them. Their skill, forged in hardship, bought time for bomber formations to reach their targets and strike deep into Nazi Germany. The psychological dimension of aerial combat was immense. For U.S. crews, discipline replaced fear. For German pilots, frustration grew. Each failed attack meant dwindling morale. Many Luftwaffe pilots began believing that the Americans had developed automatic defenses, an illusion created by precise teamwork and the art of predictive fire. In truth, the Americans didn't know the future. They had simply mastered the physics of it. As the war progressed, the principle of predictive aiming spread beyond bombers. Fighter pilots adapted it for deflection shooting and dogfights. Naval anti-aircraft gunners used it to defend fleets from kamikaze attacks. Even ground-based flak batteries began using radar-assisted targeting systems that applied the same logic. Don't shoot at the target, shoot where it's going to be. The idea of aiming behind had transcended the bomber cockpit. It became a doctrine of modern warfare. When the war ended in 1945, the skies over Europe were quiet again. But the lessons learned there shaped generations of military training. The science of predictive fire led directly to the development of jet-age fire control systems, guided missiles, and computer-based targeting. Every modern aircraft, from the F-86 Sabre to today's F-35 Lightning II, carries the intellectual DNA of those World War II gunners who learned to trust physics over instinct. Many gunners never became famous. Their names rarely appear in history books, but inside every bomber they were the last line of defense. From the frozen ball turret to the exposed waist gun, their courage and precision kept their crews alive. The tactic of aiming behind wasn't merely a technique. It was a mindset that demanded patience under fire and faith in unseen mathematics. They aimed where no one could see, and by doing so, they changed the fate of the air war. Among all gun positions, none captured the imagination or fear quite like the ball turret. Hanging beneath the belly of a B-17 or B-24, it was a small glass sphere barely large enough to fit one man. Inside, the gunner crouched in fetal position, operating twin 50-caliber Browning machine guns. He had no parachute. If the landing gear jammed, he could be trapped inside. The ball turret gunner was often the most vulnerable member of the crew, but also one of the most important. With a nearly 360-degree field of fire, he could repel attacks from below, a favorite approach of enemy fighters. To hit such targets, ball turret gunners mastered extreme deflection shooting, often firing far behind fast-moving fighters that appeared momentarily in their sights. One veteran recalled, "You didn't aim at them, you aimed at where they weren't yet, and hoped you'd meet them halfway." The weapon that made American gunners feared across the skies was the Browning M2 50-caliber machine gun, a weapon so reliable it remains in service nearly a century later. It fired at over 800 rounds per minute, with bullets traveling nearly 900 meters per second. Each round could tear through steel and aluminum, capable of disabling a fighter with just a few hits. But the gun's true power came from its versatility. Mounted in single, twin, or quadruple configurations, it could be aimed manually or through hydraulic turrets. To use it effectively required deep familiarity, clearing jams, adjusting sights, changing belts under stress. Training gunners to handle these weapons under pressure was as crucial as teaching them how to aim. The Browning's combination of precision, power, and dependability made it the perfect partner for the new doctrine of predictive shooting. Across America, aerial gunnery schools became cities unto themselves. In the deserts of Nevada, Texas, and Florida, thousands of trainees lived, studied, and trained together. They practiced on moving trucks, skeet ranges, and even from the backs of open jeeps that simulated aircraft motion. Instructors drilled them not just in marksmanship, but in teamwork, discipline, and focus under fear. Posters and propaganda celebrated them as guardians of the sky. Songs and newsreels praised their skill, yet the reality was grueling: endless repetition, high failure rates, and the constant reminder that few would complete a full tour of missions alive. Gunnery schools were not just training centers, They were factories of precision, churning out the defenders of America's strategic bombing campaign. The doctrine of strategic bombing, destroying the enemy's industrial heart, depended entirely on the ability of bomber crews to reach their targets. Without effective gunners, daylight bombing would have been impossible. The German air defenses, from Focke-Wulfs to flak towers, were designed to annihilate unescorted formations, but as American gunners improved, mission survivability rose dramatically. Each bomber's defensive ring protected not only its own crew, but the entire formation. The U.S. Army Air Forces soon realized that the gunner's mastery of predictive aiming had become a form of strategic weapon, as important as the bombs themselves. Behind every successful gunner stood an invisible army of support personnel, many of them women. At training bases, members of the Women's Army Corps and civilian technicians maintained the guns, calibrated sights, and inspected ammunition belts. Women engineers contributed to the design of training simulators and film-based scoring systems. Their precision and technical expertise ensured that every gunner went into battle with equipment that functioned perfectly. Though they never flew combat missions, their contribution to the aerial gunnery program was indispensable, and an often overlooked aspect of America's wartime innovation. After victory in 1945, U.S. military analysts examined thousands of combat reports, gun camera films, and enemy loss records. They found that the shift from direct to predictive aiming had dramatically increased hit rates and reduced bomber losses. Trained gunners achieved up to 4 times the accuracy of untrained shooters. These findings guided air tactics for decades, influencing jet-era and missile-age targeting systems. The Americans were not alone in exploring deflection shooting. British gunners developed the gyro gun sight Mk1, while German and Japanese forces experimented with optical and reflex sights. But the U.S. invested in mass training and standardization. Every gunner, regardless of background, learned the same mathematical methods and tactical doctrines. This uniformity meant American bomber formations fought with consistent efficiency across all theaters, a factor few adversaries could match. As jet aircraft emerged after the war, speeds doubled and then tripled. Manual gunnery became nearly impossible. But the lessons of predictive shooting laid the groundwork for radar-assisted and computer-guided fire control systems. From Korea to Vietnam, and eventually into the digital age, automatic targeting and predictive software all traced back to WWII gunners who learned to think a few seconds into the future. Today, fewer than a handful of WWII aerial gunners are still alive. Their service, once routine and uncelebrated, is now remembered through museums, oral histories, and restored aircraft. At air shows across America, veterans reunite with the bombers they once defended. They share stories of fear, mathematics, and brotherhood, of learning to aim where no one else dared. In the end, their achievement was not just technological or tactical, it was deeply human. They proved that knowledge and courage, when united, can change the course of war. They stopped aiming directly, and by trusting reason over reflex, they conquered the most unforgiving battlefield of all, the open sky.